Okay, good evening, everyone, both live and on the line. Actually, I'll do my normal, which is I'll just post the link in the chat. Apologies to those who panicked about no volume. I was just schmoozing with people here. Okay, so I've just posted in the chat the link. So this is a look at both this week's Yetzara, Parshat VaYakhel, and a little bit of a look back at Parshat Tissa, last week's Yetzara. And I want to start off by looking at the psukim that describe the famous incident of the breaking of the Luchot, something I touched upon in my Joshua this last Shabbos, Parshat Tissa, but I want to look at again. Sorry. And the pasuk says, "VaYakhel ki boishesh Moshe l'redes b'nahar." The people saw that Moshe delayed from coming down on the mountain. VaYakhel ha'am al Aron, they gathered against Aron or to Aron. Vayomer elov kum aselanu Elohim asher yelchel lefanenu, make for us a god that will go in front of us. Ki zeh Moshe ha'ish asher elanu me'eretz Mitzrayim lo yodanu ma hayolo. We don't know what's happened to Moshe. Famous pasuk. The incident of the golden calf, the Egel HaZahav, because we don't know where Moshe is. Vayehi, pasuk 19. Now we jump in source 1 all the way to the end of the story. Moshe comes down from the mountain and he sees what's happening. Vayehi kasher korav ala machaneh. Moshe comes down the mountain. Vayas ha'egel u'mecholos. He sees the calf and the dancing. Vayicha af Moshe. Moshe's anger waxed. Vayashlich miyodes haluchos. He threw from his hand the luchos. Vayishaba usam tachas ha'har. And he broke them beneath the mountain. The very famous incident of Moshe smashing the Luchos as a result of his shock at seeing the Egel HaZahav. Now, Chazal are amazed at this story. What gave Moshe this confidence to cast off the Luchos in this manner, and what led to his sort of action? It's a bit like if on a Rav leaves his shul on Simchas Torah to go and get the Sifrei Torah in for Simchas Torah, and he comes back in and he sees that the party's got a little bit out of hand, and he decides he has to shock the congregation. I mean, this is a terrible breakdown in decorum. Something has to happen, and he grabs the Sefer Torah and he throws it on the ground. I mean, is this your tochin? Is this possible? Is this conceivable? There's even, by the way, I'm not going to go into this today, there's even a halachic question over here at what Moshe does. I mean, the Luchos surely have a kedusha, some form of kedusha of a Sefer Torah. There's technical historium here. There's mechikas Hashem. You're not allowed to just cast pasukim down on the ground, and they're shameless. In Kabballa, you're not allowed to pass down literally the name of Hashem. I mean, Naseres HaDibros contain the name of Hashem. How even on a halachic level, how is Moshe's action justified? In fact, there's a Chazal that says that the letters were the oisios were parachas. The letters flew off, and Moshe cast down a blank set of luchos, presumably coming somewhat to answer these questions, perhaps both the halachic question and the sort of conceptual question over here as to what Moshe thought he was doing over here. It's possible, by the way, I saw one of the Mefarshim in the Medrash, it's possible Chazal are playing with the pronouns over here. Vayashlich miyodo, he threw from his hands. Who's the he and who's the his? Maybe he is Hashem. Hashem threw from his hands. In other words, it's Hashem who casts the luchos out of Moshe's hands. I only printed pasuk your test, so one doesn't see the pronouns in quite the same form. But in the previous pasuk, there's been a conversation taking place between Moshe and Hashem, and it's perhaps a difficult reading, a possible reading in the pasukim. That because of this question, there's a school of thought in Chazal that somehow Hashem is a partner in this decision to throw the luchos down. But certainly in Pshutei Shel Mikra, this is a staggering decision taken by Moshe to throw the luchos down. Now, just very briefly, we're talking about the luchos. I mean, it's an interesting thing that the Torah was given on stone at all. Why couldn't this Torah be given on parchment, as we nowadays have it, or paper? There's perfectly other good vehicles to receive the Torah. It's a longer question exactly what the luchos are, but certainly they were according to Chazal, they were made of sapphire. They were the stone itself was beautiful. I think we've discussed here before that again in the simplest understanding of the psukim, the luchos was square. Not rounded on top. I think I may have mentioned before one symbolic idea perhaps behind the way we represent our luchos with the rounding at the top, which seems to the best of our understanding, to be contrary to the shape of the luchos, but there seems to be a very old minhag, which, as far as we know, does not date from non-Jewish artists. It seems to predate it, in which Jews traditionally drew the luchos with a rounded top. I mentioned a thought I heard from one of my teachers, Rabbi Zobin, that maybe this is to symbolize that the real place the luchos are meant to be built, written rather, the real place of the writing of luchos is a luchos lebecha, on the tablets of your heart, on the slates of your heart, rather than on luchos even. The Torah is not meant to be written on tablets of stone; it's meant to be written on us. Maybe the shape of the luchos is symbolic of the heart, the classic symbol of the heart with a rounded top. This will remind us of this image of luchos of heart as opposed to luchos of even. I'll just actually post in the chat again because we've got a lot of other people have joined the link to the handout for those who don't have it. In addition, the luchos, as we know, were mezeh or mezehin kusavim. They were engraved all the way through. I think I mentioned again in my Joshua briefly on Shabbos, the Chazal that understand there's something miraculous about this. They can be read on both sides, and yet they're engraved all the way through. The letters don't reverse. They're letters which seem to be suspended. The stone is somehow suspended. The samach is suspended because it's a circle with a piece in the middle. The final mem seems to be suspended, and the like. Choros on the luchos, engraved on the luchos. So there's a lot of symbolism in the structure of the luchos, and this will tie in a little bit to some of the ideas that we will discuss. That these are certainly very remarkable artifacts that we're addressing. And I called this shiur Artifacts of Kedusha because I opened the shiur to share really two ideas, both from the Meshech Chochma, one of which we touched on, I saw in my notes many years ago from one angle, but I hope we'll pursue in a slightly different angle, in which the Meshech Chochma discusses what we mean by the concept of Kedusha, of artifacts of Kedusha. But certainly, if there ever was a candidate for an article of holiness, of Kedusha, the luchos would be this candidate, carved by Hashem, miraculous in its very essence, and even in the way that the letters are held in place, and not just carved the letters by Hashem, but even the body of the tablets of the luchos themselves carved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And here the Meshech Chochma comments and addresses a very important idea. And he discusses this act of destruction, almost wanton destruction, seemingly, of Moshe Rabbeinu in his response. And I printed it at length simply because I wanted you to have access to the words of the Meshech Chochma more fully for those who wish to look at it later, because it's a very, very beautiful piece, and I won't really have time to do full justice to it, so I'm just going to bring out some highlights from it. And he says at the beginning of the first paragraph, the idea is, the heart of the Ummah HaYisraelit, the Jewish people, is Torah and faith. Eretz Yisrael v'Yerushalayim hema prati or snifei haTorah, niskadshu b'kedushat haTorah. They are details and branches of Torah, but they are not the ikka. They are not the fundamental. They are branches of the fundamental, and they are sanctified with the kedusha of the Torah. So the way to understand the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is that it is a radiation or a physical manifestation of a more profound kedusha, which is the kedusha of the Torah. And he says, fundamentally, there's no difference in all the rules of the Torah between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. We don't find that most of the halachas of the Torah change between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. There are some mitzvahs which are teluyos ba'aretz, but mitzvahs which are agricultural. But beyond that, there isn't a distinction in place in the halachas of the Torah. I think we discussed on another occasion a very different view around this matter, the view of the Ramban. But for now, we're going with the view of the Meshech Chochma, which is certainly the normative halachic view, that despite the significance of Eretz Yisrael, the halachic system isn't really dependent on Eretz Yisrael in a profound way. And he similarly says, the laws of the Torah apply both to the highest person, Moshe, the man of God, and the lowest of the low. The Torah is not dependent on any human being. And he then continues in this first paragraph to say that the reason we have items which we call items of Kedusha are because of human limitation. In truth, the idea of physical objects achieving sanctity is really ridiculous in its essence. Sanctity is where? Sanctity is found in human free will, in choices that humans make, in moral decisions that we invest in decisions that we make, in our self-development. What does it mean almost? It's almost outrageous to think of a physical space or a physical object as bearing kedusha. It doesn't make sense. What could be Kaddish about an object? An object is just an object. Human beings can make themselves Kaddish. We can make ourselves Kaddish. We can sanctify ourselves if we choose to so do. We can develop the animalistic within ourselves, or we can develop the spiritual within ourselves. If we choose to develop that which is spiritual within ourselves, we can transcend our raw physicality, and we can become beings of kedusha. The Meshech Chochma, this is not an anti-physical message of the Meshech Chochma. We've learned the Meshech Chochma on other occasions in which he belongs very much to the school of thought that stresses the sanctity of humans over the sanctity of angels, because we make free will choices and we can develop ourselves. But nonetheless, the choices we make are choices to choose to use our physical bodies in the development of a meaningful life of connection to spirituality and to Hashem. There we can talk about the idea of kedusha. But what does it mean to talk about kedusha, sanctity, around an object? And he says the source of the problem is that Judaism ultimately, in its essence, is a very profound philosophical and mystical belief, which demands of us to relate to an infinite, absolute, existent being, Hashem. And for us to relate to that which is infinite, that which is beyond finite, is almost a contradiction in terms. The essence of infinity is that it is not finite, it's not bounded. The essence of infinity is not graspable. That which is grasped is seized through its boundaries, through its external borders. Physically, we seize an object, not just from where it is, but from where it isn't, from its external borders. And conceptually, we think about ideas not just because of what they are, but because of what they're not. If something is everything, if it is boundless and borderless, nothing can be said about this, as the Rambam famously elaborates in his guide to the perplexed. How on earth are we meant to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And yet the Torah calls upon us to experience both ahava and yira, both the emotions of love and the emotions of fear, or perhaps more accurately, in our connection, in our relationship to Hashem. So how are we meant to explore emotions? In the third last line of the Meshech Chochma, the first paragraph, he says in the last two words of the third last line, he says, "Rikudei hanefesh," the dancing of the soul, v'sichus hadam, and the boiling or bubbling of the blood, nishave mimusug muchshi v'nira, generally is aroused through ideas which can be felt and seen. What sort of things get our emotions going, get our poetic soul stirred? Generally, that which is visible or tangible, not just abstract concepts. Normally, you can hear a sort of beautiful philosophical idea. It won't have as much impact on you as a WhatsApp video that goes virtual, in which some speaker is telling an inspiring story with moving music playing in the background and nice scenery appearing on the screen. This is what arouses our emotion and our sort of engagement, our passionate engagement with Judaism. Now, ultimately, that's not really, in truth, the way we're meant to connect to Hashem. And there are individuals, rare individuals, who are able to become passionate in a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though he is an abstract being. I mean, a prime example of this is the Rambam. The Rambam we think of often as a cold philosopher. He was a philosopher, and his life was dedicated to the world of ideas. Those who knew the Rambam, and the Rambam himself alludes to this, he was a person of passion. He was drunk with the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he speaks in some of his more personal writings about his relationship to Hashem. He uses very, very strong language about the relationship to Hashem, in which he uses the words almost of drunkenness and drunk with love, and yishka tomid, that there's almost a love sickness that he experienced in his relationship to Hashem. But these are rare individuals, and in general, we humans need something tangible to grab onto. And this, in a theory or an idea that the Meshech Chochma develops, which we did speak about in other years, he says this is really what a lot of the Mishkan is about. The Mishkan is this is a well-known idea. The Mishkan, which really targets the senses, whether it's the sense of smell with the Reach Nechoyach, whether the Katoras, whether it's the music and shiur of the Levium, whether it's the gold and the silver and the bronze and the cloths that we used, the Choved, the Luteferes, the glory of the diamond, stone, valuable stone dotted garments, the Kohen Gadol. This was to give people a tangible method of connecting to Hashem. And this, he says in paragraph number 2, is really what went wrong with the relationship of the Jewish people to Moshe, because when they saw that Moshe was delayed, they panicked. Now, this is evidence or an indication of a wholly wrong relationship to the role of Moshe. And look what he says in the first lines of the second paragraph. This is what Moshe screamed out aloud. Are you imagining, are you fooling yourself that I have some sanctity other than the commands of Hashem? That in my absence you made a calf. God forbid, I am a man like you. How can you see in me any intrinsic sanctity? There is no sanctity beyond that which is the degree to which we reflect the role that we have achieved in our service of Hashem. And if I've disappeared, then ultimately I was merely a manifestation of a mission from Hashem, and that mission can be achieved from elsewhere. He then refers to the Gemara in Gittin, which speaks about Titus, the general, the Roman general, the son of the Roman Emperor Vespasian, who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and in an act of a repugnant act, committed immoral behavior there on the floor of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and nothing happened. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, if he entered in the Kodesh HaKadoshim with even a trace of an inappropriate thought, is destroyed. And Titus, the Roman general, can enter into the Kodesh Kadoshim at the time of the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash and perform the most profane of acts, and nothing happens there because the Kodesh Kadoshim no longer has kedusha. It's not a place of sanctity once its kedusha has been removed. And he says in a very extreme paragraph, in the middle of paragraph 2, Sof Dava, literally the middle of the words, he says, Sof Dava, all said and done. There's nothing of sanctity in the world ultimately that deserves intrinsic recognition. Only Hashem, and only to him do we worship for that reason. So this is a danger in the service of Hashem. And he carries on therefore in paragraph 3, the paragraph at the bottom, page 1, that begins with the word V'zehu. Let's just read a little bit of this. V'zehu, and therefore, when Moshe drew near to the camp, he saw the Egel and the circle of dancing, which we read these pasukim. He saw that the mistake was great. The Sophic Klal, they didn't consider it any doubt whatsoever. They were certain that Moshe has gone. They didn't even bother posting a lookout to check where Moshe was. Look after the brackets at the end of line 2. Haven to us, he understood their mistake. Moshe became angry and he threw from himself the luchos. And he explains that he threw for the luchos because he understood that now the luchos were devoid of any sanctity. The luchos were given as a message, as a delivery of a relationship, of a bris, a covenant to the Jewish people. The Bnei Yisrael have breached that covenant, and not only are they devoid of sanctity, but if you would give them the luchos, it would be the most dangerous gift in the world. Because if these are a people who are drawn after ascribing holiness to Moshe or to an Egel, to a cow, the luchos will simply become objects of sanctity. They will become artifacts of kedusha in a misappropriated way, and this will just become the root of their service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By the way, in the next paragraph on the top of page 2, he spells out. He says that this is, in a sense, part of Hashem's slight criticism of Moshe in the event of the Egel. If you look at the top of the paragraph and on the top of page 2, the paragraph that is Fizer, he says this is all part of the language that Hashem uses. Hashem says to Moshe, "Your people have sinned. The people who you leich raid, go down and go and descend, kishiches amcha, because your people have become corroded." And Chazal pick up on this nuance of your people have become corroded. What sort of way is this to talk? Are Bnei Israel the people of Moshe, or are they the people of Hashem? And the Meshech Chochma says this is sort of the nuance of Hashem's language to Moshe. And the problem is that they see themselves as Amcha, they see themselves as your people, that they've become drawn to your leadership and see you as the artifact of Kedusha, rather than the truth of who really is behind this. In fact, if we look at the very language at the beginning of source 1 that they use, they say, Zeh Moshe ish, asher ha'elonu me'eretz Mitzrayim. Moshe who took us out of the lands of Egypt. Moshe took us out of the lands of Egypt. It's Hashem who took us out of the lands of Egypt. So Hashem is saying, Lech, raid, ascend, look what's happened, Kishich Amcha, your people have corrupted themselves. They're seeing themselves as your people, rather than understanding that who really you represent. There's a significant sort of message in Chazal, in which Chazal understand that Moshe was praised for his act of breaking the Luchos, and they actually derive an interesting halacha from this praise that's given to Moshe. Let's have a look at source 3 and 4, which the Meshech Chochma highlights, and see how they read the pasuk. So in source 3, this is in Devarim, and Moshe is speaking, and he's telling the Jewish people the history of what happens. But at that time Hashem said to me, this is source 3, I'm going to give you a second set of tablets of luchos. And I will write on the second tablet the same words as I wrote on the first luchos which you broke. So this is Moshe's description of Hashem saying, I'm going to give you a second set of luchos to rewrite after the first set were broken. Now, there's a very beautiful sort of comment of Chazal on this. And the first thing is they pick up on the nuance of the language. Aluchas asher shibata, the luchas that you broke. Now, there's many ways to say that in Hebrew. For example, aluchas ki shibata, the luchas that you broke. There's other ways, or luchas shesh shibata, the luchas that you broke. Whenever the word asher appears in the Torah, Chazal understands it to mean a positive event that happens. Asher shibata, that you broke. There can be a that you broke with a sign, there can be a that you broke with a joyfulness. They link the word asher etymologically to the word ishur, which means certification and approval, to the word ashrei yoshvei v'secha, which we translate as happy are the dwellers in your house. But it probably more accurately means, it links the word ishur, certification, ashrei, they're sort of certified and well established and a contented positioning. That's probably more the meaning of ashrei yoshvei v'secha. Those who dwell in your house are established in a contented and meaningful manner. So whenever the word asher is used, Chazal see it as a positive verb. And they sometimes pick up when the use of the word is incongruous. And here's one of the examples. Asher shibata, that you broke, is a positive that Moshe broke the luchos, or a negative that you broke the luchos? Say Chazal, evidently Hashem considered the breaking of the luchos to be a good thing under the circumstances. It's a pity that the circumstances were what they were, but now that what happens, Asher shibata, it's a positive thing that you broke the luchos. They link it also etymologically to the word yasher, that which is straight. That the point of yashra, straightness, is the most efficient route to get from A to B. The geometrical definition of a straight line is it's the shortest route from A to B. It's linked in our understanding to the words ishur and ashrei, that which is efficient and is flowing in the flow. Things are going well, things are well established. This is the word asher, ishur, ashrei, yashar. And therefore they understand, this is source 4 at the bottom of page 2, a Gemara in Bava Basra, in which the Gemara says that Moshe said to Moshe, you did well, Yasha Kochacha, you did well that you broke Shkoyach. Yasha Kochacha, it's Shkoyach, it's in the Yiddish Shkoyach, that you broke the Luchos. So this is the Gemara in Bava Basra. Now, Rashi brings it, yes, right at the end of the Torah. The concept that Rashi says is a Gemara really. The Meshech Chochma is going to draw something interesting out of this. But you're right, the last Rashi in the Torah sees that one of the most magnificent achievements of Moshe's life is the breaking of the Luchos. This is like a primary display of leadership. Absolutely. This is one of Moshe's great acts of leadership. But what we'll need to understand is why. But for now, let's look at what the Gemara says is a halachic result of this, and this is where the beauty of the Meshech Chochma comes in. You're right. So far, what I've been saying really is Chazal or Rashi, but look how the Meshech Chochma takes it. Have a look at source 4. I printed it in English also. Where do we learn from the Gemara in Bava Basra that the fragments of the first tablets, sorry, it says tables, but I should say tablets, were deposited in the ark? Says the Gemara, he learns it from what we just now learned. That the pasuk says Asher shibata, which indicates that that both the tablets of the Luchos and the new Luchos were placed in the Aron. In other words, there are two readings in this pasuk that the Gemara brings. One reading, the more famous one, as quoted by Rashi, is that Hashem is giving his approval of the breaking of the luchos. But the second reading that's being given over here is that there's an equation being made between the broken tablets and the whole tablets, that both of them should be put in the Aron, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, why should the broken luchos be put in the Kodesh HaKadoshim next to the whole luchos? What sanctity do they possess? And why are they there in the Aron, in the holiest place, in the Beis HaMikdash, broken shards of sapphire, of stone, of luchos? Why should they be placed there? Says the Meshech Chochma, they need to be there because it is only the broken shards of the luchos which allow the second set of luchos to be recreated. Putting luchos in the Aron, a second set of luchos in the Aron, is a dangerous act. Hashem wants us to have the luchos, but there's a danger to the luchos. The protection of the luchos is that there's a broken set, that there's fragments around them. So when you look inside the Aron, the greatest artifact that we have in our world, the Aron there in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, only visited by the Kohen Gadol once a year. What do we see in the Aron? We see luchos and broken fragments. In other words, a reminder. I want you to have the luchos. This is a message from Hashem, but only next to the broken tablets. Realize that they can be broken. They can be smashed at any time. They have no intrinsic value unless you, as the Jewish people, imbue them with Kedusha by understanding them for what they are, as a mere vehicle or receptacle for the words of Hashem. You take them out of proportion and you begin making an idolatry out of them, then they're broken, then they're fragments, they have no value whatsoever. We are capable of making idolatry even out of things of the greatest Kedusha imaginable. So says the Meshech Chochma in a beautiful reading of this statement of Chazal. Two readings of the Pasuk. One reading indicates the approval that Hashem has for the breaking of the luchos. The second reading is an equation between the two, that both of them are munach ba'aron, both of them are placed in the Aron, indicating that it's not safe to have luchos unless you also have a broken set of luchos next to them. Now, just the conclusion of the Meshech Chochma, which is the final paragraph on the Meshech Chochma in the middle of page 2. The Meshech Chochma brings a translation of a chapter in Tehillim, which we are very familiar with. So this is Perek Sadi Tes, the 99th chapter of Tehillim, which we say in Kabballa Shabbos, and therefore we're familiar with it. And the Meshech Chochma just takes us through the reading of these psukim. So let's learn together source 5, chapter 99 in Sefer Tehillim. And what we're really reading is the final paragraph of the Meshech Chochma. Hashem malach yigzamim yoshev keruvim tonot oretz. Hashem reigns, let the people tremble. He's enthroned upon the keruvim, let the earth quake. So we see Hashem is enthroned upon keruvim. Where is the symbol of the enthronement of Hashem on the keruvim? The Aron, which stands in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which has keruvim on it. Now the keruvim are the peak of danger in this, because keruvim are the closest we ever come to the physical sculpture and imagery of spiritual forces. What exactly are the keruvim? We don't know, but they are angelic forces. The Rambam in Mon Nevuchim says that the wings that we ascribe to angels are symbolic of the idea that they're light, right? The symbol we have of that which isn't stuck to the earth, but is able to fly and transcend are winged creatures. So we use the symbolism with keruvim of winged creatures. Kadosh Baruch Hu is Yoshev keruvim. He runs the world and directs it in a spiritual manner. And the world quakes. The world sees the power, the daunting power of Hashem, and quakes. Hashem b'tzion gadol. Hashem is great in Zion. V'ramahu al kol ha'amim. He is high above all the peoples. Hashem is great in Zion, in Eretz Yisrael. That's where we see the manifestation of Hashem. Zion is also a sign, a signpost. So Zion is meant to be, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is that of a Zion, of a signpost. It's meant to be an arrow that directs our attention to something else. It's a tziyun, it's a direction of something which points us to something else. And therefore Hashem b'tziyun gadol v'romu al kol ha'amim. Hashem is great in Zion. He is elevated over all the people when it is something that signposts us to Hashem. Yod shimcha gadol v'nora. Let them praise Hashem because his name is gadol v'nora. He is elevated. Carries on the pasuk that we should understand. Now we're looking at pasuk K. We need to understand that Hashem is great. Now he says, Moshe of Aron b'koyanov, or Shmuel b'kori Shmoi. This is Pasuk 6. Moshe and Aron amongst the priests, and Shmuel amongst those that call out his name. Korim and Hashem v'hu yanim. They call out to Hashem, and he answers them. Which point in history is this talking about? This is talking about pre the building of the Mishkan, pre the building of the Beis HaMikdash. When we look at this pasuk, we wonder what is the connection between Moshe and Aaron on the one hand and Shmuel on the other hand. And they share a role in that they are both the prophets that bring into existence the temples. Moshe is the one that brings into existence the Mishkan, and Shmuel is the one that brings into existence the Beis HaMikdash. These are psukim in Tanakh, in which Shmuel directs David about the future design of the Beis HaMikdash, though of course we're aware that the Beis HaMikdash in actuality is only built by Shlomo. So the prophecy, the leadership of Moshe and Aaron is that of bringing the Mishkan into existence, and the leadership of Shmuel is that of bringing the Beis HaMikdash into existence. But Moshe and Aaron and the Kohanim, and Shmuel b'Koshmo, Korim and Hashem v'hu yanim. They guard out, they call out to Hashem, and he answers them. In other words, even without the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, what really brings the relationship is the connection to Hashem. Shamru eidosav v'chok nasan. As Pasuk Zayin says, it's the guarding of his commandments and the giving of the statutes of the mitzvahs of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, the Meshech Chochma is reading this perek as an introduction to the building of the Beis HaMikdash and the building of the Mishkan. We're going to be building a Mishkan, we're going to be building a Beis HaMikdash, but understand that ultimately, as the Pasuk says, Pasuk 9 at the end of this chapter, we're going to worship Hashem on his mountain of holiness on the Beis HaMikdash, but realize that the real connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is through the chok and the edus, through the guarding of the Torah and mitzvahs and the structure that's been given, because without that, no true connection to Hashem is possible. He also indicates here, and I don't have time to go through this in full detail, but there's a story in Shmuel, in Shoftim, in which the Mishkan is captured and the Aron is captured by the Pelishtim, and the Pelishtim respond in great fear. And they say this is dangerous. We've got danger from the Aron because this is, in fact, the very language of their pasuk is revealing. Who will save us from these gods? In other words, they're not understanding what the role of the Aron is. They're seeing it as a god or a godly force in its own right. And Shmuel, who in his time, in his era, did not have access to a Mishkan for most of his life. As Shmuel entered into adulthood and into his full prophecy, we know that the Mishkan where he had served together with Egel was destroyed. He didn't have a Mishkan. He didn't have a Kodesh Kedoshim, and his role is that of the preparation, the one who prepares for the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Nonetheless, he is the one who is equated to Moshe in his plan of building the Mishkan and is able to call out directly to Hashem. So says the Meshech Chochma in this very beautiful reading of this chapter in Tehillim. Now, the Meshech Chochma carries on in another piece in a remarkable way. And this is the next idea that I want to share, which starts off as a sort of separate idea, and then he ties it up and links it to the previous idea that we have spoken about. Let's take a moment for breath. We've actually here largely been talking about Parshat Tissa, but this week is Parshat VaYakhel. So let's do some learning of Parshat VaYakhel. Vayomer, source 6. Vayomer Moshe el b'nei Yisrael. Moshe says to b'nei Yisrael, Ru'u kor Hashem b'shem. Hashem has called by name, Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor l'mata Yehuda. Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Chor, of the tribe of Yehuda. V'yamale Yosef ruach elokim b'chochma b'tzuna v'das v'chol melacha. He's filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge, etc. So this is source 6. Betzalel has been chosen as the builder and the architect of the Mishkan, the one who is uniquely endowed with the ability to build it. What is unique about Betzalel? What is it that gives him his qualities and his ability to build the Mishkan? The Meshech Chochma is going to highlight 2 qualities that he possesses. Let's learn source 7. And the 2 turn into one. There's a common denominator between the 2, which we'll see in a moment. And this next source is a very, very interesting one, a very troubling one, and one that gives us a fascinating and disturbing reading of a piece of history. And the figure the Meshech Chochma is going to quote is a late Rishon or early Aron called Chosid Yaivet. Is this a name that's familiar to anyone? The Chosid Yaivet. So there was a Talmud Chacham born somewhere around 1440, we don't know exactly when, expelled from Spain in 1492. So he's sometime in his 40s and dies in 1508, so sometime in his late 60s or perhaps early 60s, perhaps early 70s. His name is Rabbi Yosef ben Chaim. His family name is Ya'avetz, and he's referred to as the Chosid Ya'avetz, the pious individual Ya'avetz, the man who's known for his great piety. In a moment, we'll understand a little bit better why he's referred to as the Chosid Ya'avetz. He wrote, by the way, a number of the Sfarim, Chasdei Hashem, Ma'ama Ha'achdus, a sort of essay about the Achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yesod HaEmunah, the foundation of faith. He wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos, with which he's perhaps most famous for. So people who have heard of the Chosid Ya'avetz have generally heard of him from his commentary on Avos. So again, we are talking about a figure who lives through the expulsion from Spain. And he wrote a book, a disturbing and challenging book, about the response of the Jewish community in Spain to the expulsion. And he was very bothered by what happens at the time of the expulsion, as were many at the time, because as much as we perhaps celebrate later generations of Spanish Jews who with incredible sacrifice as Moranos maintain their Jewish identity for centuries actually, under persecution of Catholic Spain, and ultimately, many of them managed to leave and rebuild a Judaism. Something horrific happens in 1492. And this is that you had the mass assimilation and agreement to conversion of what until then had been the largest and most powerful Jewish community in the world. At that time, probably Sephardim number some 90% of world Jewry. Spain is far and away the largest Jewish community, bigger than North Africa, bigger than the Middle East, and bigger than the Ashkenazi world at this point. And something terrible happens. A significant part of the Jewish population, perhaps more than 50%, perhaps even as many as 2/3, decide to stay in Spain. Now, I hesitate when I talk about this, because who are we to judge, right? What does it mean to be a refugee, to be expelled from your land, to have to run away? We look at refugees who cross the Mediterranean from North Africa to arrive in Europe. That we hear on the news constantly, a flow of refugees. It's horrible. They're traveling across the Mediterranean in little rafts. Many of them are drowning. Our ancestors had to do the reverse journey when they needed to flee from Spain in poverty. The mortality rate amongst the refugees of Spain was horrific. The Spanish Jewry, really Sephardi Jewry, in many respects didn't recover fully from this, and its demographics really till the modern era didn't catch up. It was a terrible, beyond words, experience for Jewish people, and certainly I am not in a position where God forbid, none of us are in a position where we would pass judgment about decisions made by Jews at the time. But the Chosid Ya'avetz did. He was someone who fled Spain in 1492 and was gutted, devastated at the response of his peers, many of whom chose to stay. And he was critical of this decision. And again, I'm simply sharing what he says because it's a very interesting piece of history and something said by a person who has gone down in Jewish history as a great figure. He also contrasted it with the reaction of the Ashkenazi world to persecution. And we know from the Kinnos and the like that in the Ashkenazi world, in equivalent experiences around the Crusades and other such expulsions, every single year, by the way, through the medieval era, there was Ashkenazi expulsion from lands. Every single year. There was no stage at which Jews were settled in Germany and in France and in Provence and in backwards and forwards, in and out of Paris and in and out of Vienna and Austria, terrible travels. And yet the Ashkenazi world took it. There was no example, not a single example of mass conversion or anything even equivalent to that. And the Chosid Ya'avetz said we have to look at what's gone wrong with Spanish Jewry. What is it that's allowed Ashkenazi Jewry to stand up and Sephardi Jewry to crumble in this way? So this is the question he posed. Again, the mind boggles at the pain behind this question, what it feels like to be a refugee from Spain. I'm simply sharing what he says. And he says we need to look at the difference between our two Jewries. And he says, you know what? We Sephardim thought we were very sophisticated. We engaged in philosophy and in depth of thought, whilst our Ashkenazi brethren didn't. Again, we've discussed this on many occasions. The Ashkenazi world has never had a strong philosophical tradition, any way akin to that of the Sephardi world, of the Spanish world. He says, we made a mistake. We became too clever by half. Because when your Yiddishkeit is built on deep and profound philosophical speculation, you lose something. You lose a passion of engagement. You lose a simplicity of faith. You lose a sort of black and white understanding of wrongs and rights. Everything becomes overly complicated and everything nuanced, and you can twist yourself into any line of reasoning in which you can ultimately justify mass assimilation. We drained ourselves, says the Chassid Yavot, of spirituality by over-engaging in philosophy. Now, there's something in what he's saying, and I think we recognise that it's not a. I'm not commenting on the sort of cause and effect. That's not for me to comment. But on the idea, and as much as I spend a lot of my time teaching and thinking philosophy, because I can't help it, I live off that, and this is my connection to Yiddishkeit. We can also recognise that if this is one's only connection to Yiddishkeit, it can become lukewarm. We need the kumzitz, we need the Kabballa Shabbos, we need the warmth, we need the energy. And the truth is, all of us live in Yiddishkeit. As much as we engage in philosophy, we live in Yiddishkeit that's been moulded by the Mekabbalim also. We can't live in Yiddishkeit. You know, Kabballa Shabbos is a creation of the Kabbalim of Safas. We live in a Yiddishkeit in which there's a blend has been created, and as much as some of us might be inspired by the thoughts of the Mon Avuchim and the like, we cannot try and recreate a pristine philosophical rationalist, so-called rationalist Judaism, rid of any traces of the warmth of Hasidus or the warmth of Kabbalah. We need this in our lives to connect to Yiddishkeit. And the Chafetz Yavot said we need to re-engage. This is why the name Chassid was ascribed to him. The name Chassid was ascribed, obviously, in the modern day Hasidic movement to their to the sort of passion that they brought to their Judaism. But it was a term that existed in the past to unique individuals. Rabbi Yonah was described as a Chassid. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, the famous Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, there were rare individuals that were granted the title of Chassid because they were people that were observed by their contemporaries, and they were seen as the flame of the passion of Yiddishkeit burning so strongly in them that these are Chassidim. The son of the Rambam, by the way, is called Rabbi Avram ben Aramam, Rabbi Avram HaChassid. He was also given the title Chassid because the son of the Rambam was aware of this problem and wrote a work in which he translated the philosophical ideas of the Mon Avuchim into a practical handbook of service of Hashem. And he dedicated his life to this. He wrote a sefer called Sefer HaMaspik Le'oved Hashem, a work in which I take the philosophical ideas of my father and I translate them into practical ideas, because my father burns with a passion of Yiddishkeit, because he was a rare individual for whom philosophy could do that. But most of us, it can't do that for that. We need, as the Meshech Chochma said, a warmth and an engagement and a physicality and an energy to get our blood boiling, to get our heart racing, in order to have a passionate connection with Judaism. And rare is an individual who can be inspired by philosophy to a degree of being able to be most nefesh, to give up their life. The Rambam, by the way, in an earlier wave of persecution by Muslim extremists, ran away from Spain. He didn't give in. Of course, he didn't shmad. The Chassid Yavot isn't claiming that philosophy is flawed and is wrong and shouldn't exist. He's simply saying if you get the balance and the proportion wrong, you will end up with this devastating destruction of what was once a proud part of world Jewry. So says the Chassid Yavot in his message. There's a very scary line he wrote. By the way, he was a philosopher. He was an expert on thinking of the philosophers. He writes at one point that Rabbeinu Moshe, which is what the Rambam is called, is not the same as Moshe Rabbeinu. And we must never forget that distinction. As great as Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam is, Moshe Rabbeinu is greater still. And we need to focus on the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, not just on the Torah of Rabbeinu Moshe. So writes the Chassid Yavot in his work. And I think he was one of the voices that led actually to the shift in Sephardi Jewry's focus. I'm not going to go now into the whole history of it, but there was a very strong swing in the Sephardi world towards Kabballa and other ways of serving Hashem. In fact, after 1492, they largely lost their philosophical tradition. And actually, it's interesting, the seat of opposition to the spread of Kabbalistic practices and so on moved significantly to the Ashkenazi world. Figures like the Ramah, who saw themselves as students in many ways of the Mon Avuchim and wrote quite openly about it, and down through the tradition of the Vilna Gaon and the like. People who were learned in Kabbalah, but were nervous about the spread of Kabbalah as a mass movement and so somewhat cognizant of the dangers of it and so on. It's interesting how perhaps figures like the Chassid Yavot had perhaps influence on nudging Sephardi Jewry into a slightly different path of service. Says the Meshech Chochma, however, in this piece, he says that let's read source 7. Ha'inyan, the idea is the Mesiras Nefesh Tzorich Liyosh Lo B'Chakira V'Schakmus Yisera. True that self-sacrifice only occurs when one doesn't overly engage in uber-chacham, his chakmut yasera, over-chachamness, over-cleverness. V'Yehuda Mosa Atzmu B'Yom B'Msios Nefshes, etc. He says, who is Betzalel? Betzalel is Ben Uri Ben Chor Mata Yehuda. He comes from good stock. He is the grandson of Chor, who sacrificed his life to try and stop the Egel HaZahav happening. He is Mata Yehuda. He's a member of the tribe of Yehuda, who are the people who threw themselves into the Yam Suf in order to escape from the Egyptians and to trust in Hashem in his promise that if they went into the Yam Suf, they would be safe. So Betzalel comes from the stock of people who are not Hitzchak Mut Yetzara. They are not so philosophical and so caught up in wisdom that they have lost this ability to think black and white when appropriate and engage in Mesiras Nefesh. And therefore, this is why Betzalel is chosen. Vayomer Moshe ben Israel. Look back at Psalm 6. Moshe says to Ben Israel, who has Hashem chosen? Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor Mata Yehuda. Betzalel, who comes from the stock of those who know what self-sacrifice is. Therefore, because they have it, if you want to become full of chokhmah, of wisdom, of tavunah, of insight and understanding and das and knowledge, you have to be first a Betzalel ben Uri b'chor. You have to be someone who the foundation of your existence is the willingness to sacrifice oneself, the willingness not to be over clever. Yes, be full of wisdom and understanding and insight. Of course, this is an important dimension of a human being, but only when predicated, only when built upon the foundation stone of a clarity of thought and simplicity. If you lack that simplicity, then you will end up, God forbid, as the Chassid says, as the Meshech Chochma quotes from him, and as I printed in source Ace, we're not going to read inside what he says, you will end up, God forbid, losing some of the dedication and self-sacrifice that one needs for Yiddishkeit. And Chassid in his writings speaks about the condition in Spain pre the expulsion. We think it was all glamorous and this great Mokum Torah. He says there was already this deterioration taking place. And again, anyone who's familiar with the history of Spanish Jewry knows this for a fact. There were very, very strong streams of thought in Spanish Jewry that had become quite assimilated into the Spanish noble classes and the wealthy circles of Spain, and had become quite Spanishized. They'd become quite part of Spanish culture. And Chassid felt that this had gone too far, and that the poor reaction of the people at the time is an indicator of this. But let's just use the remaining minutes to finish one further idea of the Meshech Chochma, and then I'll try and just draw out a couple of conclusions from this. The Meshech Chochma points out that when we look at the actual building of the Mishkan, and this is source 9 at the top of page 4, we only find Betzalel directly making one utensil, the Aron. Vayas Betzalel as Aron, Betzalel made the ark, the Aron itself, of acacia wood, etc., etc. Ask the Meshech Chochma in source 10, Madalo cost of Bekulu Betzalel, with all the other utensils, it doesn't say Betzalel, only with the Aron. The answer is Mishum Sheshadvarim Osukam Achirim. With the other utensils, other people made. So here the Meshech Chochma says, with the other utensils, we don't find that Betzalel was a sole craftsman, not at the time of the Mishkan, and not in the course of Jewish history. Because let's not forget that the utensils were made again at other stages of Jewish history. The first Beis HaMikdash was made, the second Beis HaMikdash was made. In the future, please God, at the time of the third Beis HaMikdash, we will again construct the Kalim, the utensils of the Beis HaMikdash. We will make a menorah, we will make a shulchan, we will make a mizbeach. We will again make all the utensils. So Betzalel is not the sole craftsman of the utensils, bar one. Which utensil is only ever made one time in history and was only made by Betzalel himself? The Aron. Because the Aron was the same Aron carried through to the first Beis HaMikdash. It was Nignaz. There was no Aron in the second Beis HaMikdash, and our tradition tells us that in the third Beis HaMikdash, the Aron of Betzalel, the Aron of Moshe, will be restored. Says the Meshech Chochma, why does Betzalel have to be the unique craftsman of the Aron? The answer is because he's Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor. He is Betzalel who knows what sacrifice is. Where did Chor sacrifice himself? Against the Egel HaZahav. When the whole of the Jewish people have gone crazy and are either worshipping the Egel HaZahav, have fallen into this trap of ascribing Kedusha, sanctity, to objects, to that which is material, and have forgotten that ultimately it's all about ourselves and about our relationship with Hashem. It's not Moshe who is Asher Elonu Meretz Hashem, who's brought us out of Egypt. And even great figures don't feel strong enough to fight the tide, even if they're not engaging themselves in service of the Egel, God forbid, but they don't feel able to fight. There's one figure who has the clarity of thought to realize this is a complete mistake. This is Chor. So, but Betzalel ben Uri ben Chor is the sole figure who can build an Aron, because an Aron is a very dangerous thing. The Aron is going to have Keruvim on it. It's going to be an item of holiness. It's going to sit in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the Holy of Holies. It's going to have luchos inside it. The Aron is liable to be misunderstood like nothing else in the Beis HaMikdash. The Aron is the seat of Kedusha, and also it's the seat of maximum danger. And therefore the craftsman who is equipped to make the Aron is a Betzalel, is someone who is infused through and through with a clarity of insight and realization of the danger of what an Aron is, and realizes that when they are making the Aron, this is this is not an object of sanctity. This is merely a vehicle for the Kedusha of Hashem. The Meshech Chochma points out at the end of source 10 in the final few words. He says that originally when Betzalel is appointed, he's merely appointed to do Malacha. When Moshe actually appoints him to do the Malacha, he says, he's appointed to do Melechet Machshevet, a thoughtful type of Malacha. Says the Meshech Chochma, what's the thoughtfulness of this type of the Malacha? It's a Melechet Machshevet. It's an awareness when he's creating the Mishkan that he is not creating items of intrinsic Kedusha. There is no such thing as intrinsic Kedusha found in that which is material, only the Kedusha that we create by the inspiration it gives to us and how we utilize it. When we use the Mishkan or the Mikdash well, it's an item of Kedusha. When we cease to do it well, even the Luchos have no Kedusha, even the Aron and the Kodesh Kodashim has no Kedusha, even the Titus, the wicked Titus can do the worst possible acts in the Kodesh Kodashim and has no significance. It's our reaction, our response to an Eretz Yisrael, to a Beis HaMikdash, to a Kedim, that makes it the seat of Kedusha, and this is what equips a Betzalel to be the builder of the project. And the final source that I want to look at is, again, alluded to in the closing words of the Meshech Chochma, is source 11, a Gemara in Yoma. And the Gemara, we've looked at this Gemara before in a different context, I think in the Hanukkah story, that the Gemara is a mystical Gemara. It talks about the destruction of the Yetzara of idol worship. So at the beginning of the Second Temple era, the Gemara says, the leaders of the Jewish people looked at the Yetzara of idol worship, and they said this is a destructive force that we Jewish people are not navigating successfully. We're not coping with it, and we can't handle it. And somehow mystically they removed the Yetzara of Avodah Zarah. And on Hanukkah, I think I spoke about how this ties into the rise of Greek rationalism and the spread of philosophy and a different form of spiritual relationship to Hashem. We discussed some of these ideas, very profound ideas, in the Gemara, but be that as it may, this is a mystical source that talks about the removal of the temptations of Avodah Zarah, which, by the way, is a historical fact that Jews stopped serving and stopped being drawn to Avodah Zarah at that point in history. The whole of the First Temple era, that everyone is worrying about Avodah Zarah. Second Temple era, there's other challenges to the Jewish people: Greek rationalism, Greek assimilation, Greek culture, Roman rule, denial of the oral law. There's 1,001 heresies that Jews still get involved in, but not idol worship. It ceases to be a challenge in that part of the world at all. Actually, it sort of more or less disappears from that part of the world. Now, there's one feature in the story that's very interesting, that when the Yetzara of idolatry is removed, the image that's used to describe it is like a young lion of fire emerging from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. A fiery lion emerging from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And again, when I spoke about this at Hanukkah, I think I shared the thoughts of the Vilna Gaon around this metaphor. Here, I'm going to share the idea of the Meshech Chochma around this metaphor. Because he says, where is the seat of the danger of Avodah Zarah? Tragically, the answer is in the Aron and the Kodesh Kodashim. Because what is the source of the temptation for us to ascribe intrinsic spirituality and Kedusha to physical objects? A product, an artifact given to us because of an honest reflection of human nature, which is we find it hard to draw inspiration from abstract ideas. We need that which is tangible, but an idea which lends itself to distortion and to the worship of idolatry, deriving its force from the Aron and the Kodesh Kodashim, because the Aron and the Kodesh Kodashim had become a force of idolatry. The Aron in the second Beis HaMikdash was hidden. There was no Aron in the second Beis HaMikdash. He's equating this to the destruction of idol worship, of the temptation of idol worship in the Jewish people. We paid a price. We had to give up having an Aron in the second Beis HaMikdash because we couldn't afford it because of the temptation of idol worship and the thinking of Meshech Chochma. Third Beis HaMikdash, we'll go back to having an Aron. Hopefully we'll be able to do it in proportion. So the summary of the thoughts of Meshech Chochma, he's spoken about the danger of ascribing intrinsic force to spirituality, even Luchos, even an Aron, the need for there to be shivrei Luchos, the broken shards of Luchos, Moshe smashing the Luchos because he realizes that the Luchos will just become another Egel, they'll be worshipped by the Jews, that's the same. The need for the Aron to be built by a Betzalel who has a simplicity of faith, and yet, and because of that, has the dedication, the self-sacrifice, the clarity of thought, that he doesn't get drawn into the Egel, and how the Aron remains in the thinking of the Meshech Chochma a danger, such that in some mystical way the Jewish people had to rid themselves of it temporarily in the second Beis HaMikdash era. Now, I just want to conclude with one final reflection, and the Meshech Chochma is a figure that fascinates me, and I often learn his Torah because he spans philosophy, Kabballa, Halacha, Lomdus, the four sorts of pillars of some Talmidei Chachamim or some Chachamim because they're Lomdus, they're Rosh Yeshiva who are Mefalken in Torah. Then you have Poskim in Halacha, then you have philosophers, and you have Mekubalim. Meshech Chochma is really a world-class figure in all four, and this is a classic example of where he doesn't fit into either category, because one of the sort of significant divides between what we might call the rationalist school of thought or philosophical school of thought and the Kabbalistic school of thought is around to what degree we ascribe intrinsic kedusha to spiritual forces. To what degree do we see spiritual forces as having their own intrinsic existence, and to what degree are they merely means for us human beings to be inspired and engaged in spirituality? And in general, the thinking of the rationalists, the thinking of the Rambam, as the Rambam writes in Moed Nevuchim and many other places, is that we should view Eretz Yisrael, we should view the Beis HaMikdash as a land which is equipped with a unique geographical circumstances and location to enable us to facilitate our service of Hashem. But there isn't an intrinsic, when we talk about intrinsic spirituality, we mean intrinsic potential. There's something about the structure of a Beis HaMikdash, the structure of Eretz Yisrael, even the structure of Jewish people. Us as Jews, we don't have intrinsic kedusha. We are not existentially different in the thinking of the Rambam to our brothers and sisters, fellow human beings who are non-Jewish. We are merely the people who have been entered into a relationship, into a covenant with Hashem, and therefore have a mission to fulfill it. There isn't an existential difference to be sought out, an intrinsic fundamental fabric of existence difference to be sought out in the existence of an Eretz Yisrael or an Am Yisrael or in the Beis HaMikdash and the like, and the thinking of the Rambam. And the Meshech Chochma very firmly plants his flag on that side of thought in this discussion. And yet in the same piece of the Meshech Chochma, he quotes the Chovos Yavot, which is a very stinging blow against over-rationalism in Jewish thinking, and really an appeal for a return to a certain type of emunah peshuta. And this is a classic piece in Meshech Chochma, and really why I think for all of us, none of us should have a Yiddishkeit which sort of defines ourselves as, we're rationalists or philosophical Jews, we're Kabbalistic Jews. We've inherited a rich strand of thought, and we need to play with the different streams of thought within Judaism and try and integrate them into all of us, in all of them into ourselves, so that we can sort of navigate a path which allows us the intellectual insight of the philosophers, along with the passion and warmth of the Mekubalim, along with the understanding of fundamental kedusha, and so on and so forth. And this Meshech Chochma, in my mind, is a fascinating example of how he combines these two schools of thought, and it's really a very, very strong critique of certain aspects of sort of existential sanctity, and also very strong critique of an over-philosophical relationship to our Yadus. So with that, I'll finish this sort of idea on Parshat VaYakhel, which also gave me a chance to catch up some ideas I'd wanted to share last week in Parshat Sister when I was away in America and missed the opportunity to give a share. So I hope you forgive me for smuggling in a bit of last week's Sadra also.
Yeah, that was good. It was good link.
A good link. Right, we managed to connect the two. So yes, I don't like shiurim that I've prepared go to waste. So
thank you, Rabbi Zobin.
Thank you very much. I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you so much as always for joining.